Israel test firing a missile earlier today that could hit Iran. The test was successful. The missile capable of carrying a nuclear warhead and striking Israel's archenemy. Now growing debate over whether the country's leaders are preparing for an attack on Tehran's nuclear facilities after reports that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is seeking authorization for a strike. Leland Vitter, live in Jerusalem. Leland?
Megan, this certainly puts Iran's nuclear program back on the center stage here. And we have two things, not only the missile test, but some saber rattling coming from Prime Minister Netanyahu's cabinet. So it's a threat against Iran and an implied threat to the United States and also to Europe, which is do something about Iran's nuclear program or we, Israel, will. Now, this is amateur video you're looking at right now of the Jericho missile test, which launched out in the past couple of days. It was a successful test, and this now puts Iran's nuclear program well within reach of Israel's nuclear weapons. A few years ago, Israeli F-15s struck Syria's nuclear reactors, and that was with the tacit approval of the United States. Right now, Israel does not have that, and Israel has said if hit by Israel, Iran is going to retaliate not only against Israel, but also against the United States. Where do we go from here? History tells us that if Israel was planning a preemptive raid, they would not be talking about it in the way they are. But ahead of this big report on Iran's nuclear program, it seems as though Israel is once again saying, we will not allow Iran to get the bomb if it actually comes to push or shove.
Reports, and this one comes just as Israel tests a missile believed capable of carrying a nuclear warhead to Iran. Israeli military leaders say the drill was planned months in advance and had nothing to do with recent speculation about a possible strike on Iran. Let's work through some of this. This is very important, of course, Israel being our major ally in the Middle East. Jim Walsh, an international security expert and research associate at MIT's Security Studies program, joins us now. Jim, again, a lot of different reports, a lot of conflicting reports. What's going on here?
Well, what really has triggered this, Jenna, are these reports that you referred to that suggest the Prime Minister and other important cabinet members are trying to persuade other cabinet members to sign off on a military strike against Iran's nuclear reactor. And in fact, there were developments today. There were further press accounts that suggest that the Israeli military is pushing back, as well as former officials in their intelligence agency saying this would be a terrible idea. And that's all in the newspapers. Now, I try never to say never, but I am a little skeptical about this. We've seen this sort of stuff before where Israel makes claims that Iran is close to having a bomb, it's going to strike, but it would be a big risk and it would be a big slap to the United States if they went off and did this. So I'm going to remain skeptical, even though the reports are growing every day.
Here's what an Israeli official said on a radio program, and I'm just going to read this quote because it really struck me. Quote, "The military option against Iran is not an empty threat, but Israel should not leap to lead it. The whole thing should be led by the United States and as a last resort." What do you make of that comment?
Well, I think that really puts the finger on a key point here, which is a lot of people are interpreting this controversy as really an attempt to put pressure on the United States and on the international community to take a tougher stand against Iran. Israel does not want to be the one that carries out this strike alone against Iran. They can do it. It would be militarily challenging, but they could probably pull it off. But, you know, they're living in a region right now which is in turmoil. The Arab Spring makes things very uncertain where they live, and they just as soon have the United States do it, and by threatening to do it, that puts pressure on the U.S. to step up and try to do more about Iran.
Jim, why now, though? Why would Israel come out with these comments now, whatever the strategy is, and we're still debating on what that is? Why now? With everything we've seen from the Arab Spring, why now would Israel want to put more pressure on anyone in the international community?
Jenna, that's a great question. I think it is the question to ask because, frankly, not much has changed fundamentally with Iran's nuclear program. It's sort of steady as she goes, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But there's been no major breakthrough, and it's not suddenly closer to a bomb this week than it was last week or will be next week. So why? Some have speculated that we have important meetings coming up in Vienna in the International Atomic Energy Agency, and that the P5+1, this group of countries that meets with the United States to talk about what to do about Iran, that they may be meeting soon. And so there's at least the speculation this is intended to pressure them, because it's really hard to look at the situation and say that anything has really changed. Iran has an enrichment program. It continues to beaver away at it, but it's not substantially closer to a bomb than it was any time recently.
I only have about 30 seconds for this, but we spent so much time on Israel's strategy. What about our strategy with Iran? If you could break it down real quick for us, Jim, what are the key components to making it a successful strategy?
Well, I think the key strategy right now is sanctions, 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 particularly as we go into an election year. It's going to be hard to politically to have the space to negotiate. At the end of the day, though, negotiation will have to be part of this. You know, unless we invade Iran, Iran is going to have to sign on to something in which they get something out of it and we get what we need out of it. But I don't see that happening anytime soon.
And as you say never, though. It seems like all options are potentially on the table. Jim, we haven't seen you on our program in a long time. It's nice to have you with us again, sir.
Good to be back.